Part 3. The canyon echoed with the thunder of hooves and the sharp bark of revolvers. Shadowhand MacCready spat out a curse as Lucinda's bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through the frayed edge of his duster. He ducked behind a boulder, eyes slitted against the dust. Beckett's approach was kicking up. Lucinda's chest heaved, every muscle screaming from the tension of holding that Colt steady. She'd fired 3 shots already, 2 warning, 1 to wound, and her mind danced on the edge of panic and calm. Marshal Beckett, astride his black gelding, drew to a hard stop just beyond the choke point of the canyon. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, his boots hitting the packed earth with a muffled thud. His eyes locked on Lucinda's, a wordless vow that no one would touch her while he drew breath. "You all right, darlin'?" he called, voice low. But cutting through the canyon hush, Lucinda didn't answer. She couldn't. If she opened her mouth, she was certain her fear would come pouring out like floodwater. Instead, she narrowed her stance, cocked the hammer back, and watched the shadows for MacReady's next move. A single shot cracked the silence. Beckett returned fire, his aim forcing MacReady to shift deeper into the boulders. Lucinda risked a sidelong glance and caught sight of Beckett advancing in short, silent steps, a predator's grace wrapped in a lawman's badge dot in the distance. The rest of MacReady's gang waited like wolves at the canyon's mouth. They'd figured the canyon walls would trap Lucinda and Beckett like cattle in a pen. But the marshal had chosen this spot for a reason. It was his ground, his advantage. Lucinda remembered every lesson her late husband had taught her about pistols and patience. She forced her breath to slow, squeezed the grip tighter, and waited. She could almost feel her child stir, a flutter low in her belly, reminding her that she carried 2 lives now, one already born in spirit, the other fighting to be born in flesh. A sound, gravel shifting, broke her trance. MacReady lunged. From behind the rock, revolver raised. Lucinda fired once, the shot missing by a hair. But Beckett was already moving. He rolled across the dirt, came up on one knee, and squeezed the trigger. A single shot. Clean. Final. MacReady's revolver clattered to the ground first. Then MacReady himself, his eyes wide with disbelief, his last breath escaping like wind. Through dry grass, Lucinda lowered her gun, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had finally been set down, if only for a moment. Beckett holstered his Colt, eyes scanning the ridge for any sign of the waiting gang. "They'll scatter," he murmured, stepping over MacReady's body to reach her. "No stomach for a fight now that their snake's been skinned." Lucinda laughed, the sound dry and choked. "And if they don't? Then they meet the same end." Beckett's hand touched her elbow, rough palms grounding her. "You did good, Lucy." Before she could reply, a fresh burst of gunfire rained down from the canyon rim. Beckett's hand shot out, pulling her behind the largest boulder. Bullets sparked against stone, filling the narrow gorge with the stink of gunpowder and the cold echo of death hunting them both. Lucinda's heart thundered in her ears as Beckett leaned in close. "We can't hold this ground forever. When I say run, you run. Straight for that crevice to the east. You'll see it a split in the rock." "What about you?" she rasped. "I'll be right behind you." Another volley tore splinters off the boulder. Lucinda's grip on her Colt was slick with sweat, but her eyes stayed fixed on Beckett's. His stare burned into hers, unbreakable, relentless, alive. With a yell, Beckett sprang up, revolver roaring. Lucinda didn't think she ran. Boots pounding the canyon floor, lungs burning, she darted for the narrow cleft Beckett had promised. Behind her, she heard him firing, cursing, then the thud of boots as he followed. The crevice swallowed her in shadow. She pressed herself to the rock wall, peeking out just in time to see Beckett whirl and fire one last shot, dropping a rifleman on the ridge like a ragdoll. They didn't stop running until the canyon walls gave way to open scrubland. Dawn's first light staining the horizon in pale promise. Lucinda stumbled to her knees, gasping, hands splayed protectively over her belly. Beckett knelt beside her, one arm braced across her shoulders as they both listened for the sound of pursuit. Silence. For now, but Lucinda knew this was just the beginning. McCready's death would bring more. A widow with nothing to lose was dangerous enough. A pregnant widow who could shoot straighter than most men. That was something the West had never seen, and the West would not forgive. She turned to Beckett. Voice hoarse but unyielding. What now? He met her gaze, a slow, grim smile spreading beneath the shadow of his hat. Now? Now we make them regret the day they thought they could burn your life to the ground. In the distance, the prairie wind carried the promise of a storm. Lucinda felt its electricity spark beneath her skin. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ready to fight back, and this time she would leave her mark. Part 8. Council storm. Heavy rain pattered against the stained glass windows of the council chamber as Lucinda Vaughn, Marshall Beckett, Clara Jensen, and Jonah Matthews filed inside. Hushed gasps rippled through the audience gallery. Townspeople, investors and drifters pressed shoulder to shoulder, eager for news of the charter that could remake the West. At the front, the High Magistrate, flanked by Councilman Thorne and other civic leaders, awaited them. The magistrate's ebony robes rustled as he rose. "Madam Vaughn," he intoned, voice echoing. "You claim to possess the original charter of the Western Iron Line, sealed and signed. Present your evidence." He nodded to the archivist, who carried Lucinda's diary in trembling hands. Lucinda stepped forward, her skirts heavy with rain-soaked mud and determination. "This diary belonged to my husband, Daniel Vaughn, one of the original signatories. Within these pages lies the true charter, filed before the fraudulent amendments that stripped the rightful heirs. I submit it for verification and reinstatement of the Western Iron Line's true governance." She placed the diary on the lectern, letting the hushed crowd see its battered cover. A murmur rose, some hopeful, some skeptical. Clara and Jonah exchanged tense glances as Beckett remained silent at Lucinda's side, fingers itching near his Colt. Councilman Thorne rose, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, this appears to be an antiquarian curiosity at best. No official records corroborate its contents. To base the entire railroad's future on a personal diary," Magistrate's gavel pounded. "Archive records, please." The archivist moved forward, flipping through ledgers. Thrice he glanced between the diary and the official rolls. His spectacles fogged, he swallowed. This charter text appears identical to a sealed entry filed 20 years past. However, the amendment in 1873 appears to have been forged, expunging several signatories including Mr. Vaughn and others. A gasp erupted. Thorne's jaw clenched, knuckles white around his papers. "Read aloud the names," Lucinda urged, voice soft but echoing. The archivist cleared his throat, reading names in shaky tones. Thomas Caldwell, Maeve Blackwood, Daniel Vaughn in Lucinda's ear. Her husband's fatherly handwriting sprang to life. Beckett's hand closed on hers, conveying strength. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them. "Back, where is this amendment seal?" Thorne demanded. "How did this diary?" Jonah stepped forward, voice resolute. "Because men in power destroyed the seal. Because they chose greed over progress." Clara nodded. "And now, the rightful heirs demand justice." Outside the chamber's tall windows, the storm crescendoed, lightning flaring across slate skies. Magistrate turned to Thorne. "Councilman, your vote on this amendment is on record. You stand accused of orchestrating its forgery. How do you plead?" Thorne's powdered face drained. He opened his mouth, closed it, then whispered, "Not guilty." Beckett stiffened. "Evidence shall decide, not guilt's words." He held out a sealed envelope, a confession extracted by Clara from Thorne's aide during the chamber's bustle. "This letter details your plan, signed in your own hand." Clara produced the letter. The crowd leaned forward. Under the chamber's lantern light, Thorne's trembling signature glowed like blood on parchment. Stunned silence. The magistrate's expression hardened. The council will convene immediately. Justice shall be swift. Without a backward glance, he exited, robes swirling. Thorn sank into his seat, head bowed. Members of the audience whispered, then erupted in cheers and claps. Lucinda's chest swelled with relief, but she steadied herself. This was but one victory. The council returned minutes later. The defendant was found guilty of forgery and conspiracy. The original charter was reinstated in Lucinda's name and that of other rightful heirs. The Western Iron Line's governance would now honor the terms her husband had fought to preserve. Lucinda's name rang through the chamber, applause and tears of joy. Beckett guided her back to Clara and Jonah. Hazel stood in the shadows, silent, pride in their eyes. Outside, the rain had ceased. A golden dawn pierced the clouds, painting Marston City in warm light. Steam engines whistled, and townsfolk spilled into the streets, hailing Lucinda Vaughn as the railroad's heir. Clara laughed, joy lighting her face. "You've done it, Lucinda," Jonah grinned. "The line is ours, yours." Beckett tipped his hat. A widow's grit and a diary, unbowed rare combination in these parts. Lucinda closed her eyes, the diary's leather warm against her side. In her belly, life fluttered, a partner in hope, born of struggle. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we secure the lands, begin construction. For our child and for every family left waiting for the promise of steel and steam." Under Marston City's new dawn, ashes were swept away and a railroad's future was reborn. And in the heart of the West, a widow's resolve became legend. Part 9. Foundations of Steel. The first rails gleamed under Marston City's freshly risen sun, silver lines threading across the red clay and sagebrush. Lucinda Vaughn stood beside Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews at the construction site, fever bright in her eyes. Around them, teams of laborers drove spikes, leveled ties, and guided the iron rails toward the horizon. Months of planning had led here. Her husband's diary validated the charter. The council's decree cleared the deed. Maps and the railroad's backers poured in supplies. Yet beneath the clang of steel and wood, Lucinda felt the tremor of unfinished business, hidden threats that still lingered in the wind. Beside her, Beckett surveyed the scene. His lieutenant's hat perched on his head, leisured gloved hand. Resting on a measuring rod, he nodded at Lucinda. "It's coming together, ma'am." His voice held pride, but edged with caution. She offered a small smile, brushing dust from the diary's new leather binding. "We've come far, Marcus, but I fear the valley's ghosts aren't yet laid to rest." She looked down the newly laid track, beyond the construction camp to the Badger Hills silhouette on the horizon. Clara adjusted her surveying tool. "We've dealt with Blackthorn's men and Councilman Thorne's treachery, but some pockets of lawlessness remain. We'll need to secure the route beyond Deadwood Pass." Jonas spat into the dust. I've heard tales of bandits near the Devil's Gate. They won't take kindly to the iron line carving through their playground." At that moment, a rider galloped in from the east, masked by dust, urgency in every hoofbeat. The foreman squinted. Horns of alarm sounded. The rider reined in before Lucinda, heels digging into crimson earth. He removed his goggles, revealing a lined face and a badge pinned to his chest. Deputy Harlan Crane. "Miss Vaughn, Marshal Beckett," Crane panted, brow dripping sweat and dust. "Deadwood Pass Blackthorn's gang returned, bigger than before. They're targeting the rail crews. Thought you should know." Lucinda's heart pounded. How many? 24, maybe more. Arms bristling with rifles and repeating carbines. Beckett's hand dropped to his Colt. "They'll try to sabotage the tracks, slow us down." He met Lucinda's eyes. "We need to strike first." Lucinda nodded, resolve hardening. "Gather volunteers. I'll ride with you into Deadwood Pass to flush them out." She met Clara's gaze. "You handle the surveying crew. Keep the rails going. Jonas, secure the construction camp." Clara and Jonas saluted. Harlan mounted, ears fixed on Beckett's. Instructions. Lucinda felt fear twist in her gut, herself expectant, traveling into the lair of killers. But fear's sting steeled her soul. By midday, Lucinda, Beckett, Harlan, and a posse of 6 burn-booted volunteers rode out, cavalry lines cutting east toward the looming choke of Deadwood Pass. Riders spread in a loose, skirmish line alert for ambush. The pass's walls rose like dark sentinels. Dry grass crackled beneath hooves. Beckett paused, whispering, "They'll be up on the rim, picking off stragglers. Keep tight." Lucinda pressed her pregnant belly, unconsciously felt the baby's kick, a pulse of life urging her onward. She steeled herself. Suddenly, rifles cracked. Bullets zinged overhead, pinging rock. Horses neighed, rearing as chaos erupted. The posse splintered into cover. Harlan dropped behind a boulder, rifle at the ready. Beckett fired back, barreling suppression at the rim. Lucinda kicked at her mare, charging toward an outcropping of sandstone where smoke curled from musket fire. The dust and smoke blended. Gunmen moved like phantoms. Lucinda dismounted swiftly, dropping behind a boulder. She felt the diary strapped beneath her cloak, precious proof she carried in a war zone. She squeezed her Colt, heart hammering. Fear warred with fury. She would not yield her husband's legacy to thieves. Shots rang, and a volunteer screamed. Lucinda dove, grabbing his arm. The man lay bleeding from a shoulder wound. She pressed rag to the gash. Beckett emerged from cover, eyes blazing. "Medic! Jonas sent a surgeon with the supplies. He'll be at the camp." He knelt, voice low. "Hold on, friend. We'll push them back." Lucinda nodded and raced forward to stand beside him. They fired as one, a pair of bullets carving warnings into the rim's shadows. The ambush lines flinched. In the confusion, the posse regrouped, Harlan's men flanking, Beckett leading a charge. Lucinda stayed to direct fire until a lull opened. Black-clad riders retreating through the pass's narrowing confines. They pressed the advantage, spurred by adrenaline's roar and the knowledge that every foot of track mattered. By dusk, they had driven Blackthorn's gang from the pass. The posse returned battered but unbeaten, at least 10 gang members left behind. Lucinda's mare stumbled, sweat shining on its flank. Beckett tied his horse beside hers. He glanced at Lucinda, who pressed her hand to her side. The adrenaline haze fell away, pain blooming where McCready's bullet had grazed weeks before. She gritted her teeth, refusing to fall. Beckett saw and lifted her arm to steady her. "We'll get you home." She straightened, voice clear. The rails must reach Deadwood by morning. No rest yet. Her gaze fell on the pass's tumbling rocks. The silhouette of wounded riders on the rim. Jonas's surgeon arrived, patching the volunteer. Clara emerged, worry etched in her features until she saw Lucinda's determined stance. "You did it." Clara's voice caught. You're incredible." Lucinda inhaled, looking west to the rails stretching deeper into the frontier. "Our future runs on steel and resolve. Let's finish this." Under the blood-red sunset, Lucinda Vaughn, the pregnant widow who fought beside men and outgunned bandits, mounted and urged her horse forward. The Iron Line's promise lay ahead, built on trust, steel, and a determination born in ashes. Part 12. The Midnight Pursuit. Under a waning moon, Lucinda Vaughn prepared for the chase. The bloodstains by the boulder were fresh, deliberate, meant to unnerve her. She felt the weight of her unborn child stir against the diary's cover, as if echoing her own heartbeat. Beckett emerged from the guard tents, revolver in hand. His eyes held quiet concern. "We ride now," he said softly. Clara and Jonas stood by the tracks, alert. Hazel approached, map in hand, lantern silhouetting determined features. "We've marked tracks leading northeast, beyond the Devil's Gate Trail," Hazel said. "If they fled on horseback, that's their path." Jonas checked his rifle. "I'm with you. We'll split into 2 groups. Beckett and I circle the canyon rim. You 3 head east. Lucinda nodded. Let's finish this. She mounted Eliza, diary strapped securely. The chill air snapped at their breath as they rode into the darkness. They followed the hoofprints through rocky foothills. Beckett hunkered beside Lucinda, guiding her through narrow defiles. Jonas and Hazel flanked. An owl's call echoed a warning in the stillness. Then distant shouts and a single shot cracked against stone. Lucinda's heart leapt. They urged their mounts forward at a trot. They found Clara kneeling beside tracks where a bloodied bandana lay. The blood was dark, no mistaking the betrayals. Stain, she looked up, voice trembling. They're moving fast. East, toward Dead Man's Creek. They pressed on, riding hard across sage and shale. The moon sank behind clouds, plunging them into near blackness. Beckett held steady, illuminating their path with a lantern. By the creek's bank, they spotted campfires, 2 flickers against the night. Figures moved among tents, shadows stretched long. Lucinda's pulse quickened. There! They dismounted, leaving horses to quiver and snort. Lucinda crept forward, revolver drawn. Beckett took cover by a boulder, rifle leveled. The betrayer emerged, a man with familiar gait. Deputy Harlan Crane, his badge gleaming under firelight. He held a lantern in one hand, a rifle in the other. Harlan? Lucinda whispered, shock lancing. Her voice, he turned, lips twisted. You should have stayed in Marston, widow. Your fight's over. Beckett fired overhead, commanding. Drop the rifle. Don't make me shoot you. Crane smirked, raising the lamp high. It's not me they want. It's the diary and you. He flicked the lamp toward a hidden figure stepping from the dark. Hazel's hood dropped, revealing an uneasy smile. I'm sorry, Lucy, Hazel said, voice thick. They promised safe surveying work. But when I learned who you really were, the trail cut deeper than gunfire. Lucinda's grip tightened on the Colt, tears blurring her vision. Before she could respond, Crane lunged, rifle swinging. Beckett nicked his arm with a shot, sending him sprawling. Hazel cried out, backhand across the face. Why, Lucinda's voice broke. Why betray us? Hazel lowered eyes. They threaten my family. Foxworth's clan won't hesitate to burn every track if I refused. The creek's rush muffled her words. Lucinda swallowed, fury and pity warring. Crane rose, pistol leveled. Finish her, Marshal. Beckett dove, knocking Crane's aim aside. Lucinda fired 2 shots, one catching Crane's shoulder. He roared and bolted into the night. Hazel sank to her knees, sobbing. Lucinda holstered the Colt slowly. She knelt beside Hazel, voice soft. We'll protect your family. But your path ends with us. Hazel looked up, tears shining. I'm sorry. I never wanted harm. Lucinda touched Hazel's shoulder, hand steady. You did what you thought you must. But now you stay and atone. Help us finish the track. Help save what your family risks losing. Hazel nodded, voice small. I will. Beckett moved to the creek, scanning the ridges. Reinforcements coming at dawn. The camp's vulnerable till then. We hold them off. The creek's water glowed faint, silver in moonlight. Lucinda stood, the diary's pulse echoing her resolve. Let them come. We'll protect these rails and our future. Under the hunting stars, Lucinda Vaughn faced betrayal and danger anew, but her spirit, like steel track, would hold. To be continued in Part 13. Part 13. Break of dawn, the first light of dawn crept through the pines like molten gold, casting long shadows across Deadwood Pass. Lucinda Vaughn emerged from her vigil, the chill night still clinging to her bones. Under her shawl, the diary pressed against her side, its weight both burden and boon. Harlan Crane's betrayal still lingered, his blood-stained scarf lay where Beckett had relieved him of command. Now with the moon bowed out and the sun ascending, she prepared for the final reckoning. Marshal Marcus Beckett moved alongside, revolver holstered and rifle slung across his back. His presence was a steady anchor. "They'll strike at first light," he warned, voice grave. "We must be ready for everything." Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews rallied the survivors, loading the flat cars behind the engine with spikes and replacements for last night's damaged ties. Hazel Crowley approached, eyes red-rimmed but resolute. She handed Lucinda a folded map, its creases worn. "Tracks are clear to the next cleft," Hazel said softly. "If they come, they'll flank us down the ridge." Lucinda nodded, tucking the map into her boot. "We go to them." They advanced along the rails, volunteers fanning out with rifles at the ready. The locomotive's boiler hissed like a resting beast, steam drifting in ribbons above the tracks. Ahead, Deadwood Pass narrowed its sheer walls, funneling any into a death trap. Beckett raised a hand, split into two squads. "Clara, take the high ground on the east ridge. Jonas, secure the west side. Lucinda and I will cover the center." At his command, the columns broke, moving with military precision. Lucinda gripped her Colt, the early sun glinting off its barrel. A sharp whistle signaled the trap sprung. Rifles cracked from cover bullets, riddled spikes and wood ties, shouting punctuated by the thunder of hooves. Volunteers threw themselves into ditches, rifles answering in deadly unison. Beckett sprinted toward a fallen boulder, returning fire. Lucinda dashed across the rails, dispatching two marauders who had crept too close. Her Colt split the dawn air, each shot precise, each trigger pull fueled by the baby's life within. Clara's squad surged down from above, rifles cutting off the ambush's escape routes. Jonas's volunteers, emerging from across the creek, swept in, corralling the bandits like sheepdog in the heart of the pass. Lucinda spotted Crane's lieutenant, still recovering from Jonas's blow, raising a pistol. She dove, Colt firing as she rolled, the bullet tearing through the lieutenant's coat. Before she could finish him, a roar of excitement echoed. Clara had captured the last rifleman at the summit. Panting, Lucinda rose and dusted her skirt. Beckett rejoined her, rifle spitting flame. Around them, the volunteers secured prisoners, binding hands with cord and spit. Part 13. Break of dawn. The first light of dawn crept through the pines like molten gold, casting long shadows across Deadwood Pass. Lucinda Vaughn emerged from her vigil, the chill night still clinging to her bones. Under her shawl, the diary, pressed against her side, its weight both burden and boon. Harlan Crane's betrayal still lingered. His blood-stained scarf lay where Beckett had relieved him of command. Now, with the moon bowed out and the sun ascending, she prepared for the final reckoning. Marshal Marcus Beckett moved alongside, revolver holstered and rifle slung across his back. His presence was a steady anchor. "They'll strike at first light," he warned, voice grave. "We must be ready for everything." Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews rallied the survivors, loading the flat cars behind the engine with spikes and replacements for last night's damaged ties. Hazel Crowley approached, eyes red-rimmed but resolute. She handed Lucinda a folded map, its creases worn. "Tracks are clear to the next cleft," Hazel said softly. "If they come, they'll flank us down the ridge." Lucinda nodded, tucking the map into her boot. "We go to them." They advanced along the rails, volunteers fanning out with rifles at the ready. The locomotive's boiler hissed like a resting beast, steam drifting in ribbons above the tracks. Ahead, Deadwood Pass narrowed its sheer walls, funneling any into a death trap. Beckett raised a hand, split into two squads. "Clara, take the high ground on the east ridge. Jonas, secure the west side. Lucinda and I will cover the center." At his command, the columns broke, moving with military precision. Lucinda gripped her Colt, the early sun glinting off its barrel. A sharp whistle signaled the trap sprung. Rifles cracked from cover bullets, riddled spikes and wood ties, shouting punctuated by the thunder of hooves. Volunteers threw themselves into ditches, rifles answering in deadly unison. Beckett sprinted toward a fallen boulder, returning fire. Lucinda dashed across the rails, dispatching 2 marauders who had crept too close. Her Colt split the dawn air, each shot precise, each trigger pull fueled by the baby's life within. Clara's squad surged down from above, rifles cutting off the ambushers' escape routes. Jonas's volunteers, emerging from across the creek, swept in, corralling the bandits like sheepdot in the heart of the pass. Lucinda spotted Crane's lieutenant, still recovering from Jonas's blow, raising a pistol. She dove, Colt firing as she rolled, the bullet tearing through the lieutenant's coat. Before she could finish him, a roar of excitement echoed. Clara had captured the last rifleman at the summit. Panting, Lucinda rose and dusted her skirt. Beckett rejoined her, rifle spitting flame. Around them, the volunteers secured prisoners, binding hands with cord and spit. The crisis was over. Deadwood Pass belonged to Lucinda and the Iron Line. She turned to Beckett, voice catching in the morning air. "We did it. The rails will run through this pass by high noon." He smiled, relief softening his battle-hardened features. "And you led us here, widow." Lucinda's gaze drifted east, where the tracks stretched toward Marston City like veins of hope. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the child's gentle kick. "This railroad," she whispered, "is more than steel and ties. It's the future I promised him and the life I promise our child." Beckett placed a hand over hers, solidarity in his eyes. "And we'll see it done, together." As the sun climbed higher, bolts were driven into the rails, linking Deadwood Pass with the sprawling plains. Steam engines roared to life, and volunteers cheered, united by purpose and the promise of a new dawn. Overhead, the prairie wind carried the distant whistle of a locomotive, a clarion call to the West's next chapter, written by a widow's courage and bound by the unyielding resolve of those who believed in her dream, to be continued in Part 14. Part 14. Echoes on the rails. Lucinda Vaughn watched the morning sun climb over Deadwood Pass as the first freight engine rolled through, steam curling like a cloud of hope above polished tracks. Volunteers cheered and tipped hats, but her gaze was distant. Echoes of betrayal still clung to her spirit. The diary lay safe in her saddlebags, its pages promising a future for her child. Marshal Beckett guided the engine's tinkerer to inspect the rails. Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews coordinated the supply wagons to follow the train east, ensuring the line's extension beyond the pass. Hazel Crowley, redeemed by valor, helped mark waypoints for the road crews, her surveying tools glinting in the sunlight. Lucinda slid from her horse and approached Beckett. "Are we clear to proceed?" she asked, voice steady but soft. He nodded, eyes warm with respect. "The line's secure as far as the Devil's Gate. Beyond that, the terrain grows wild, but no ambush is detected." He paused, concern flickering. "But I worry about your health, Lucinda. You've pushed yourself harder than any of us." She placed a hand on her belly through her shawl. "I'm fine. The child needs a future, Marcus. This railroad's promise depends on finishing the next stretch before winter." Clara joined them, map in hand. The route skirts Devil's Gate Canyon, then follows Cedar Creek. It's rough but direct, about 30 miles. "Wagoners will clear the path." She tapped the map. "If we're swift, the train can reach the creek crossing by dusk." Jonas hefted a crate of spikes onto a flat car. "Spikes, rail ties, and supplies are loaded. We just need the go-ahead." Lucinda took a breath, the prairie wind carrying distant whistles. "Let's finish what we started. Send word to the crews this line's extension begins today." She admired the rails stretching east like a promise etched in steel dot as they moved through the camp to rally the crews. A whippoorwill called his haunting note that made Lucinda pause. Below the cry, she thought she heard Wren's laughter, the nursery rhymes her late husband used to sing. The memory tugged at her heart. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with a rider speeding in from the east. Beckett caught her arm. The rider reined in, gasping. It was Deputy Crane, bound and bruised. Flanked by 2 watchmen. Beckett stepped forward. "All right, Crane, what's this?" Crane's voice rasped. "It wasn't just my doing. Foxworth's clan has deeper roots than you know. They're turning everyone against you, spreading lies that the Charter's cursed. They'll sabotage every mile of track unless you stop." His gaze flicked to Lucinda, regret and fear mixed in his eyes. Lucinda's stomach clenched. Betrayal ran deeper than she'd realized. But she squared her shoulders. "Threats won't stop progress. We'll keep building." She turned to Beckett. "Lock him up near the engine. He'll ride with me as I inspect the rails." Beckett hesitated, then nodded. "If you insist." Crane's eyes followed her movements, silently begging forgiveness. The engine's whistle blew, eager to roll. Lucinda climbed aboard with Beckett and Crane, Hazel at her side. Clara and Jonas signaled the crew. As the train lurched forward, tracks humming. Beneath the wheels, Lucinda felt the world shift. Each tie passed under her feet was a step away from sorrow, a step toward promise. They reached the first trestle over Cedar Creek by noon. Workers cheered, hammering spikes into place, even as the train ticked forward slowly, heavy with ambition. Lucinda and Beckett stood at the locomotive's head, eyes fixed on the line ahead. She glanced at Crane, who watched the rails with longing. "You'll see, Crane. This railroad brings more than steel, it brings opportunity. You'll witness new towns, schools, hospitals built along these rails." Her voice softened. "And I'll build a home, a family on track we laid together." Crane swallowed, eyes on the rails. "I understand, Madame Vaughn." The train rolled from the trestle to solid ground, steam trailing into the clear sky. Volunteers cheered on the slopes, arms waving. Lucinda's heart swelled as the engine disappeared into Devil's Gate Canyon. The next chapter awaited. Rails carving through wilderness, dreams binding settlers to the iron path. Behind her, the camp stirred. The future rising on rails laid in blood, sweat, and unwavering resolve. To be continued in Part 15. Part 15. Devil's Gate Crossing. By late morning, the Devil's Gate Canyon loomed ahead, sheer walls of black limestone framing the narrow gap where the railroad would pass. Lucinda Vaughn led the advance on horseback, diary secure beneath her, coat and Colt at her hip. Volunteers followed in loose formation, tools and supplies loaded onto flat cars in a makeshift train. Marshal Beckett rode beside her, scanning the cliff edges for threats. His presence was a shield and a comfort. Every man's confidence bolstered by his calm authority. Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews coordinated the crews, sending teams to reinforce the canyon's wooden trestlework and shore up unstable rock faces. Hazel Crowley held her surveying tools, marking anchor points for tunnels they would bore through softer stone. Lucinda halted at the canyon entrance, raising a hand. Her pulse fluttered as she studied the gap, just wide enough for 2 rails. And a passing train. Beckett dismounted, voice low. "This is the choke point. Bandits will try to collapse the cliffs, send boulders across the rails. Watch the heights." Lucinda nodded, riding a few feet ahead. "Ready crews to clear slides immediately. We cannot afford delays." They advanced into the canyon, where sunlight barely pierced the gloom. The echo of boots on metal grated through the hush. Lucinda felt the baby kick, an affirming reminder of why she pressed on. Suddenly, a crack like thunder split the air. Rock above fractured, tumbling toward the trestle. Volunteers shouted warnings as boulders smashed rails and splintered. "Ties!" Clara cried out, sprinting to redirect crews. Jonas bellowed orders to move horses back. Beckett pivoted, drawing his Colt to fire at loose stones hanging overhead, an instinctive defiance against nature's fury. Lucinda dashed forward, lifting a lantern to light the crevasse. "Clear the tracks!" she shouted, dismounting as volunteers wrenched shovels and crowbars from supplies. Hazel rushed beside her, steadying the lantern. "We need to brace the overhang before more come down." Hazel called. Beckett covered them both. Precise shots dislodging smaller rocks before they rained down. Working as one, Lucinda directed the clearing. Spike by spike, tie by tie, they pried. Debris from rails. Sweat and dust coated their faces as another minor slide threatened. Jonas leapt onto the trestle, planting a steel cable to anchor a ledger beam to a secure boulder. The cable hissed as it tightened, shifting the weight of the rock. Clara engineered a drill team to carve relief channels, guiding water and preventing further erosion. As the last slabs slid harmlessly to the canyon floor, the first flat car, lit by the morning sun's bearing glint, rattled its way over the repaired rails. The entire crew held its breath. The car passed without incident, metal wheels singing on the iron track. A cheer erupted, echoing against the canyon walls. Lucinda laughed a joyous, triumphant peal and embraced Beckett. "We did it," she said, voice raw with emotion. He tipped his hat, face breaking into a genuine smile. "Thanks to you, widow." They led the train through the canyon's final twist, emerging onto open prairie. Ahead lay Cedar Creek, and beyond it, the promise of plains unbroken, towns rising like seedlings along the iron line. At the canyon's mouth, Lucinda halted, raising the diary above her head. Volunteers gathered, cheers swelling as the book's leather cover caught the sunlight. "This is more than steel," she called. "It's our future, our children's roads to new homes, new hope." Her voice carried across the fields like a clarion call. The crowd roared its assent. Clara wiped tears from her eyes. Jonas slapped Beckett on the back. Hazel held her surveying rod high, pride and relief shining in her expression. In the stillness. After the celebration, Lucinda's gaze swept the rails stretching east like ribbons of destiny. The diary, her husband's legacy, had guided them across blazing trials. Now it lay safe in her arms, its pages echoing with promise. She closed, her eyes hand on her belly. "For you, my child," she whispered. "May your world be built on tracks of truth, compassion, and courage." And as the locomotive's whistle blew, heralding the journey ahead, Lucinda Vaughn felt hope surge through her veins. The West's story would be written on these rails, and she, a widow forged by fire, would help write every chapter. Part 16. River of Mirrors. Lucinda Vaughn rode at the helm of the flat car through the broad expanse beyond Cedar Creek, the soft gurgle of water beneath the newly constructed trestle echoing like a lullaby for the land. The rails stretched ahead, straight as an arrow cutting through fields of sun-bleached grass. Each tie they passed marked months of sacrifice nights spent under cold stars, betrayals turned to oaths, and the ever-present thrum of new hope beneath her hand. Marshal Marcus Beckett stood beside her, rifle slung, eyes sharp against the horizon. Behind them, Clara Jensen and Jonas Matthews oversaw teams of workers driving the tracks deeper into uncharted territory. Hazel Crowley, steadier now, traced the line with her surveying rod, marking contour points in chalk on smooth limestone outcrops. Lucinda's gaze fell to the diary strapped at her hip, not merely a book, but a beacon. She traced the etched initials on the leather, DV, and a small flourish Daniel Vaughn had drawn years past. Each flick of wind across its pages reminded her of the promise she carried, a railroad's rebirth and a family's future. The flat car rattled over the trestle, emerging onto solid ground where the creek widened into a ferned pool. Across the water, the valley opened into rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods. Lucinda inhaled, tasting the promise in the air. "Beautiful," she whispered. Beckett nodded. "Until we cross the River of Mirrors, the stretch's greatest trial." Lucinda frowned. The River of Mirrors was a local name for the wide, shallow bend ahead, where sunlight danced on water so clear one could see the pebbles below as though suspended beneath liquid glass. But after heavy rains, currents beneath the surface could sweep away the unwary. Clara approached, wind-blown hair gleaming. We'll need a bridge here, timber supports sunk deep into riverbank. I have designs prepared. She handed Lucinda a rolled plan, bound with twine. Lucinda studied the blueprints. The currents are strong. We'll need to reinforce each span with driftwood anchors. Jonas? Jonas sauntered over, rifle resting on his shoulder. Already arranged. Lumber's on the way, 2 teams cutting in the pines north of here. Lucinda felt a swell of pride. Excellent. Let's get started. They disembarked, marching to the river bend where stakes had been pounded into the soft soil. Workers waded into the shallows, carrying planks and rope. The river's gentle ripples sparkled under the summer sky dot as beams were hoisted into place. Lucinda knelt by the bank, sunlight dancing across her face. The river's reflection shimmered, echoing her determined gaze back at her, a river of mirrors indeed. Then came the first tremor of trouble. A single gunshot echoed across the water, muffled by distance, but unmistakable. Workers froze, heads turning toward the tree line. A faint plume of smoke rose where Foxglove met Oak. Beckett drew his Colt. Positions! He barked, rushing back to the rail line. Lucinda followed, heart pounding. They found 3 horsemen at the tree line, rifles leveled at the construction crew. Each wore a mask of salted leather scouts from Foxworth's clan, come to claim the river block. Lucinda spat the dirt from her mouth. Not today, she raised her voice. Everyone off the bridge. Workers obeyed, scrambling up the bank as rifles cracked again. Beckett stepped forward, Colt roaring back. Lucinda dismounted, drawing her own revolver. She advanced, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. The lead horseman sneered. The widow thinks she can build rails through Foxworth's hunting grounds. We'll see about that. Lucinda's Colt spoke first, a single shot that shattered the lead rider's pistol wrist. He howled, dropping his rifle. The others rallied, charging forward on thundering hooves. Jonas and workers took cover behind timber stacks, returning fire with sawed-off shotguns. Clara fired her derringer from a vantage rock, each blast carrying the authority of someone who had seen too many betrayals. In the center, Lucinda and Beckett stood back to back. The river at their feet rippled with the impact of the first volley. Hold the line, Lucinda shouted. For our future. As gunfire echoed around the river bend, the bridge shook, but every man and woman fought with the ferocity of those defending their homes, their families, their dreams. Beneath the river of mirrors, strength was tested, bones of iron ties and living steel wills forging the path east, to be continued in Part 17. Part 17. The cradle and the crossfire, sun burned high above the prairie, casting long shadows as the iron line stretched past the river of mirrors and wound into the red clay badlands beyond. The air shimmered with heat, dust trailing like smoke from the steel wheels of the first full freight run toward Eastridge Junction. But inside Lucinda Vaughn's body, another storm stirred quieter. Deeper. Her hands trembled around the ledger as she reviewed the next segment's grade calculations. The child stirred within her, a flutter stronger than before, pulling her from charts and steel. Her breath caught. Beckett, watching from the head flat car, noticed. He stepped beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You all right? Lucinda nodded, wiping her brow. Just a sharper kick than usual. He's reminding me he's still coming, just like this railroad. Hard to say which will arrive first, Beckett said, half smiling. Though worry colored his gaze, Hazel arrived with fresh survey data. Clara trailed close behind, face pale. We've found the next threat, Lucy. There's a canyon up ahead, crooked. Knife pass. Foxworth's men have taken the old mining tunnels. Lucinda's breath hitched. Tunnels, perfect cover. They could rig the walls with black powder, trap the whole convoy. Jonas joined them, reading the tension. Do we reroute or dig them out? Lucinda stood, spine straight despite the weight in her belly. Neither. We ride ahead and clear them, quietly. Tonight. The crew exchanged glances. Jonas nodded first. "I'll gather the 4 best marksmen." Beckett handed her his flask. "We move at dusk." Night fell like a hunter's cloak. Beneath a red moon, the infiltration team advanced. Beckett, Jonas, Hazel, Clara, and Lucinda, their figures masked in shadows. The tunnel entrance loomed, a black wound in the earth. Lucinda's revolver sat cold against her hip, the diary pressed beneath her ribs like a shield of memory. Inside, the air smelled of soot and rot. Echoes of hammer strikes and whispered plans clung to the walls. They moved in silence until Clara hissed from the flank, signaling movement. Foxworth scouts emerged, lanterns flicking, rifles slung. The crew ducked behind old timbers, hearts pounding. Beckett raised his rifle. "Take the one on the right." Jonas nodded. Lucinda inhaled. The gunfire was quick, clean. 2 bodies dropped, 1 lantern shattered. Clara surged forward to disarm the 3rd, who'd fallen without a fatal wound. Lucinda strode to him. "How many inside?" The scout coughed blood. "Too late. They're lighting the vein." Lucinda turned to Hazel. "Map, where's the fuse line?" Hazel unfurled a faded draft. "Here. If we cut it halfway, we might stop the chain." Lucinda grabbed the wire cutters, handing the diary to Beckett. "If I don't make it back, give this to my son." Beckett grabbed her wrist. "No, I'm going." Lucinda met his eyes. "This ends with me. I started this." She sprinted down the shaft alone. The mine walls blurred. Sweat soaked her collar. Voices rose behind, warning her to turn back. But she pushed deeper until the fuse spark hissed through the dark. She found it lit, arcing toward powder buried near the supports. With shaking hands, she knelt and sliced the line just before it reached the casks. Silence. Then footsteps. Beckett appeared, rifle lowered. "Next time you let me be the fool." Lucinda collapsed into his arms. They returned at dawn, smoke curling from the extinguished fuses. Volunteers greeted them with disbelief and cheers. The tunnel would hold. The tracks could pass. Lucinda stood atop a supply crate, hands on her belly. "Foxworth wanted fear to break us. But it's our courage that will break him." The crowd roared. The diary was returned to her hands. The next rail tie dropped with ceremonial weight. The iron line moved forward again, across tunnels, rivers, betrayal and belief. And Lucinda Vaughn, with fire in her veins and a child near due, vowed the next time the earth shook, it would be from her son's first cry, not another man's war. To be continued in Part 18. Part 18. A Reckoning at Eastridge. Wind over the prairie rolled low and hot as Lucinda Vaughn rode toward Eastridge Junction. Dust clung to her shawl, sweat shimmered on her brow, and the ache in her hips reminded her that her due date crept close, but none of it slowed her. Behind her, the iron line thundered with life. Each spike driven was a nail into the coffin of those who'd tried to burn her out. And each stretch of rail laid forward was a hymn to her late husband's dream and the world she meant to build for her son. Beside her, Marshal Beckett rode silently. The diary was strapped to his saddlebag for safety. They both knew Foxworth would strike again, if not with bullets, then with words, courts, politicians bought by fear. This time, the battle would not be fought on canyon ledges or moonlit trails, but in the heart of Eastridge itself. Clara, Jonas, and Hazel waited at the station ahead. Eastridge wasn't just a stop, it was the first major city on the new line. Investors would be watching. Townsfolk would be whispering. And the charter, still contested by rival claims, would either be upheld or buried in ink. As the station loomed in the distance, Lucinda saw the crowd waiting. Flags snapped in the breeze. A brass band tuned instruments. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, waving handkerchiefs. Clara approached first, pressing a hand to Lucinda's shoulder. The governors inside the telegraph office. Foxworth's. Lawyers, too. They claimed the charter was never legally filed. Lucinda smiled, tired but unfazed. Then let's remind them what happens when men underestimate a widow. They dismounted. Beckett handed her the diary. Jonas held the portfolio of evidence ledgers, maps, notarized deeds signed by her late husband and ratified by 3 county registrars. Lucinda climbed the steps to the telegraph office, every pair of eyes following her dot inside. The air was thick with cigar smoke and legal threats. Foxworth himself stood by the far wall, gray-bearded, heavy-browed, and wrapped in a suit too fine for someone with blood on his hands. "Mrs. Vaughn," he sneered, still clinging to that fairy tale. Lucinda handed the diary to the governor without flinching. "I bring proof of ownership, intent, and rightful execution of the Iron Line Charter. Witnessed, notarized, and tied to every deed along the path we've built." Foxworth scoffed. "Fabrications. You've fooled these towns with drama, but this ends today." Lucinda stepped forward. "You burned my home. You tried to kill my crew. You bribed surveyors and sent killers into the hills. But you never once stopped to ask yourself what happens when the woman you try to destroy builds an army out of the people you discarded." The governor looked between them, then opened the diary. Inside were not just signatures, but detailed plans, sketches, and her husband's final letter naming Lucinda as the executor of his dream. The governor's voice cut the tension. "All parties will stand down. This charter is valid. As of now, the Iron Line is recognized and protected under the laws of this territory." Foxworth's jaw tensed. Beckett stepped in. "Any attempt to sabotage the rails from here forward is sedition." Lucinda turned to the crowd gathering beyond the windows. "Let him be remembered as the man who tried to bury a widow and was outbuilt by her instead." The celebration that followed was thunderous. Music filled the air. The first engine rolled into Eastridge. Vendors opened carts of lemonade and spiced bread. Clara danced with a schoolteacher. Jonas shared cigars with firemen. Hazel set up a table for children to try their hand at map-making, but Lucinda watched it all quietly. She sat on a bench, hands over her belly, feeling the weight of what she'd done. Beckett joined her. "You look like a general after battle." She smiled. That's what this was, wasn't it? A war, not just for track, but for voice, for name. He nodded. "And you won," Lucinda exhaled. "There's still more to build, but this was the last of the old ghosts." She reached into the diary's cover and removed a note one her husband had written on the day he finalized the first contract. She read it aloud softly. "To my dearest Lucinda, if you're reading this, you're probably fighting for something I was too weak to protect. I always said the land was for men to carve, but you showed me it's women who forge the future. I love you. I believe in you. And if there's a child in your arms when this is read, tell them their mother was the bravest soul west of the river." Tears spilled from her eyes, silent and grateful. Then, a sudden pain bloomed through her abdomen. Beckett's eyes widened. "Lucinda?" She gripped the bench. "I think it's time." He whistled sharply. Hazel and Clara came running. They cleared space in the telegraph office, laid down blankets. Jonas stood watch by the door, rifle ready in case Foxworth had one more. Card to play. By nightfall, a newborn boy cried beneath prairie stars, strong, loud, alive. Lucinda held him close, exhausted and luminous. "Daniel Elijah Vaughn," she whispered. "Welcome to your railroad." Outside, the rails gleamed under lantern light. The Iron Line rolled on, to be continued in Part 19. Part 20. The final spike. The morning sky above Silverpond was the color of molten steel. Clouds shifted across the plains like ships on slow winds, and the town below stirred with a hush that felt reverent, as though the land itself knew something sacred was coming. Lucinda Vaughn stood on the courthouse steps where she had driven the silver spike just days earlier. Her son, Daniel Elijah, lay swaddled in her arms, his tiny breaths warm against her collarbone. Around her stood Clara, Jonas, Hazel, and Marshall Beckett, all marked with the dust and scars of battles fought and won. The Iron Line was complete. From the blackened remains of her homestead to the far side of the capital, every mile of rail was now laid. It stretched across gulches and ridges, through Devil's Gate and Dead Man's Creek, under the trestle of the River of Mirrors, and over the high plateau at Eastridge Junction. Where once only grief and wilderness waited, now ran a ribbon of promise. Beckett stepped forward, a ceremonial box in his arms. He opened it to reveal the final piece of steel, the golden spike etched with Lucinda's initials and the birth date of her son. "We ready?" he asked. Lucinda nodded and stepped up onto the railhead. Below, the gathered crowd fell into silence. Storekeepers, miners, freedmen, widows, orphans, settlers, all of them had lived under the shadow of Foxworth, and all of them had helped to push that shadow back, inch by inch, mile by mile. Hazel handed Lucinda the sledgehammer. The iron gleamed under the morning sun. Clara placed her hand over Lucinda's, steadying it for the swing. Lucinda looked down at her son, who blinked up at the sky, then lifted the hammer and drove it down. The golden spike rang into place with a sound like a church bell calling the frontier to prayer. Cheers erupted. Beckett fired a single shot into the air. The town bell rang, and steam from a waiting locomotive burst skyward. Flags unfurled. Children danced. The iron line breathed its first full breath. Later that afternoon, Lucinda walked alone along the platform, the wind tangling her hair. She paused at the edge of the tracks and looked east, then west, heart full. She remembered the charred ruins of her home, the cries of dying friends, the sting of betrayal from allies once trusted. She remembered sleepless nights with her hand over her unborn child, praying she would live long enough to see his eyes. She had. And more. Clara approached. "He'll ask one day. What will you tell him?" Lucinda smiled. "That he was born in fire but raised in light. That his father gave him a dream and his mother built the road to reach it." They stood in silence a moment. Then Jonas ran toward them, hat waving. "Governor's wire just came through. Capital Rail officials want a speech next week. They want the widow who beat Foxworth to dedicate the Central Rail." Lucinda shook her head, laughing. "Let them build it. My job's done." Hazel arrived with a bundle of blueprints tucked under her arm. "If you're stepping back, I'm leading the next survey crew south. We'll name the first bridge Vaughan Crossing." Lucinda took her hand and squeezed it. "Make it strong." Beckett stepped beside her, a bag slung over his shoulder. "Thought I'd see if the law needs restoring in the capital. But I'll always be close if you need me." Lucinda looked at each of them, her comrades, her family. "I needed you all," she said softly. Then she turned back to the rail. Her baby stirred. She kissed his brow and whispered, "This is yours now. Guard it well." At sunset, Lucinda mounted Eliza for one final ride along the rails. The wind was behind her. The tracks ahead gleamed like fire. She rode in silence, Daniel safe against her chest, the gold spike now behind her, buried in the earth as both finish line and foundation. The sun set over the west, over a railroad carved from sorrow and steel, over a widow who would not yield, and over the legend she became. And when the last light vanished behind the hills, the iron line remained etched across the land like a promise never broken. The end.